My name is Kate Supron, and I served as the mayor in the village of Cayuga Heights from 2010 until 2016. A year before that, I served as on the Board of Trustees, and a year before that on the Deer Remediation Committee. Well, it was a very high density of deer in the community, led to very noticeable impacts of having so many deer. It's always a little bit of a trick to count the deer that you have. We knew that we had a lot of deer, but we didn't have an accurate count until we started with our population control program. At the time we started controlling the deer population in 2012, we had 125 deer per square mile. We had years where we had one of the big impacts were deer vehicle accidents, which are not good for the driver of the car, and they're certainly not a positive outcome for the deer. So we had years where there were, I think, 30 deer vehicle accidents in the village and less than 2 square miles with 20 miles of roads. That's a pretty high accident rate. We had concerns for safety, for human safety, because the deer no longer startled. There were folks who were concerned about the rising incidence of Lyme disease, because the higher the population of deer, the more deer ticks can be supported. We also had tremendous browse damage, both in people's yards and in the natural areas in the village, and that just is not good for your ecological balance. So we had a lot of deer impacts, and that is what drove the community to want to do something about the deer. The environment that we were operating in, both socially and physically, was challenging. Cayuga Heights is a small, fairly densely populated suburban community without a lot of open tracts of land. We also faced tremendous, and I don't mean to say that this was a problem, it was certainly a constraint, but it was also a real opportunity. We had a lot of public scrutiny of our process. We had a very vocal group of people who, both inside and outside the village, who opposed any form of deer management. The way that we dealt with opposition was that we tried to be very transparent with the process that we were following. We had a committee that had open public meetings for a year as they developed the plan. It was presented to the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees then did a very thorough and really painstaking state environmental quality review process. We then had an environmental impact study done by an outside consultant that found no negative environmental impacts. So to be sure that we would be able to prevail in the face of public controversy, we had looked at other communities to see where they got stuck in the legal process, because we assumed correctly that we would be challenged in court. So after we had completed our seeker and the board voted to move forward with our deer population control plan, we were challenged in court, but it was on the basis of our state environmental quality review, the seeker process, so we were able, at every point in the legal system, we prevailed. One other way that we overcame challenges was to be very flexible. The initial plan put forth by the Deer Committee and adopted by the Board of Trustees was a combined lethal and non-lethal population control program, and the recommendation was to cull first and then to surgically sterilize the remaining does. When we found we wouldn't have enough sites to make the culling effective, we flipped the plan and put surgical sterilization first and said we would cull the deer when we were able to get enough sites. Well, I think the resources on this site are awesome. We didn't have anything like that, but we did follow the process that was recommended, which was to look at all possible options for solving our deer crisis, both lethal and non-lethal, and looked at the impacts that those would have. So you have to be really thorough, consider all your options, you have to include everybody in the dialogue, you have to be very patient, but you have to keep perspective as well, because I think most communities, or many communities, there's some opposition, and oftentimes it can be very vocal, even if it is not representative of the views of the community. So you have to be willing to stand your ground. The other advice I would give is that a board has to know that any action they take, any solution that they put in place, is a very long-term commitment, because it's not something you just do once. The other thing that we had was tremendous cooperation between the elected officials and the employees in the village. The police were instrumental in helping us to manage the program, but we had never used them to implement the program. Another interesting piece in Cayuga Heights, the program is much more expensive than it is elsewhere, because we've done surgical sterilizations, which the biggest part of the cost is in capturing the deer, but once you've captured them, then you're done with that deer forever. But also we use professional sharpshooters. You have to really be prepared to stick with it through controversy, and you have to be willing to stick with it over time.